They were left to die. 7 heartbeats fading in the ice. When Alpha King Dominic Blackwood found the drift of snow that smelled like milk and blood, he didn't expect to find her. An Omega, with skin as white as the blizzard itself, curling her frozen body around 6 tiny, shivering pups. She was rejected, broken, left for the vultures. But when Dominic saw the bruises on her pale skin and the terror in her violet eyes, the king didn't see a reject. He saw a war. And the moment he lifted those pups from the ice, the world changed. "Tell me who did this," he whispered, "and I will burn their kingdom to ash." This is the story of the albino Omega. The blizzard over the Cascade Mountains wasn't just a weather event. It was a physical wall of white that screamed through the pines. The temperature had dropped to 20 degrees below zero. No sane creature was out in this, except for Dominic Blackwood. Dominic, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Alliance, the largest coalition of packs on the West Coast, was in his wolf form. He was a massive creature, his fur the color of midnight, absorbing the little light the moon offered. He preferred patrolling the northern borders himself when the weather turned. It kept his senses sharp. It kept the beast inside him, which was always clawing for violence, somewhat sedated. He was 3 miles past the marker for Route 9, near the old logging ridge, when he stopped. The wind howled, masking sound, but it couldn't mask the scent. Dominic's ears twitched. He lifted his massive snout, inhaling deeply. Amidst the scent of pine needles, wet earth, and ozone, there was something else, something sweet. Milk. Fear. Blood. It was faint, buried under the smell of the storm, but it was there. Dominic growled low in his throat, a sound that vibrated through his ribcage. He pivoted, his paws sinking deep into the powder, and began to run. He tracked the scent to a hollow beneath the root system of a fallen redwood tree. The snow had drifted high against the trunk, creating a natural, deadly tomb. The scent was stronger here. It smelled like distress, the sour, metallic tang of an Omega in absolute agony. Dominic shifted. The transition was seamless, bones cracking and reshaping until a man stood in the knee-deep snow. He didn't feel the cold. Alpha blood ran too hot for that. He was 6'5", built like a fortress, with dark hair plastered to his forehead. He grabbed the tactical radio strapped to his discarded vest. "Control, this is Alpha. I need a medevac at Sector 4 immediately. Prepare the trauma bay." "Copy, Alpha." The static-filled voice of his Beta, Reynolds, crackled back. "What's the situation?" "I don't know yet," Dominic muttered, tossing the radio down. "But it smells like death." He fell to his knees and began to dig. His large hands shoveled away the packed ice. He dug until his fingers brushed against something soft. Fur? No. Skin. Dominic froze. Revealed in the snow was a woman, but she was unlike any wolf he had ever seen. Her skin was alabaster, completely devoid of pigment, so pale she almost vanished into the ice. Her hair was a tangled mess of white silk, frozen in clumps. She was naked, curled into a tight defensive ball. She was blue-lipped, her breathing shallow and ragged. She was in the final stages of hypothermia. "Hey," Dominic said, his voice unusually gentle. "Can you hear me?" She didn't move. Dominic reached out to touch her shoulder to check for a pulse, and that was when he saw the movement. Beneath her. She wasn't just curled up for warmth. She was shielding something. Dominic gently pried her frozen arm away from her chest. A low, weak whine emitted from the bundle. There, pressed against the remaining heat of her stomach, were 6 puppies. They were tiny, barely weeks old, a mix of russet and grey fur. They were trembling violently, climbing over each other, seeking milk that wasn't flowing. The Omega had used her own body as a blanket. She had taken the brunt of the wind, the ice, and the frostbite to keep the wind off of them. Her back was raw, stripped of skin in places where the ice had adhered to her. Dominic felt a rage so sudden and so potent it nearly blinded him. This wasn't an accident. No Omega walked into a blizzard with 6 pups. This was an execution. He stripped off his tactical vest and the thermal shirt beneath it. He wrapped the shirt around the puppies, scooping all 6 of them into a singular, squirming bundle. Then he lifted the woman. She was terrifyingly light. Her bones felt like fragile glass birds beneath his hands. Her head lolled back, and her eyes cracked open for a fraction of a second. They weren't brown or blue. They were a shocking, pale violet, the color of a bruised dawn, the mark of an albino, a genetic rarity that some packs considered a curse and others a myth. "My babies," she rasped, the sound barely a whisper. "I have them," Dominic promised, pulling her against his bare chest, sharing his alpha heat. "I have them. You're safe. He'll come back." Her eyes rolled back into her head as she went limp. Dominic looked at the tracks leading away from the hollow. Tire tracks, rapidly filling with snow, heading back towards the highway. "Let him come," Dominic snarled to the empty forest. "I'll be waiting." The St. Jude's medical wing, located in the heart of the Blackwood estate, was usually quiet. Tonight, it was a war zone of activity. "BP is dropping! She's crashing!" Dr. Nathaniel Hayes barked orders at 3 nurses who were scrambling around the bed. "Get me 2 units of ONEG, warm fluids now. We need to raise her core temp before her heart gives out." Dominic stood on the other side of the observation glass, his arms crossed, his jaw set so hard his teeth ached. He was still shirtless, though someone had draped a blanket over his shoulders. He hadn't washed the blood off his hands yet. "The pups are stable, Dominic," Reynolds said, walking up beside him. Reynolds was a grim-faced man, efficient and loyal. "They're in the incubator in the pediatric ward, malnourished, dehydrated, and 2 have mild frostbite on their ears. But they will live." Dominic didn't look away from the woman on the table. "And her?" "Hayes is doing his best. She's unique, Dominic. I've never seen a wolf like that." "Albino? In this century?" "She's an Omega," Dominic said, his voice flat. I felt it. "An albino Omega with 6 pups," Reynolds sighed, rubbing his face. "That's a lot of mouths to feed. Do we know which pack she's from? The scents were washed away by the storm." "No, but someone drove her out there and kicked her out of a car. I saw the tread marks, heavy-duty SUV, military-grade tires." Dominic turned to his beta, his eyes flashing gold. "I want the highway cameras from Route 9 scrubbed. Every vehicle that passed to the North Ridge between 4 House PM and 6 Arcellus PM. Find me that car." "On it." Inside the room, the monitor flatlined. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Dominic's heart stopped. He slammed his hand against the glass. "Hayes!" Dr. Hayes was already moving, charging the paddles. Clear. Her body jolted. The white hair spilled over the edge of the gurney like a waterfall. Dominic found himself holding his breath, a strange phantom pain piercing his own chest. He didn't know this woman. He had no claim on her. Yet, seeing her life flicker out felt like losing a limb. Beep. 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 The rhythm returned, slow, weak, but there. Dominic let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He walked to the door of the trauma room. "Sir, you can't go in there. It's sterile." A nurse tried to stop him. "She's alone," Dominic growled, pushing past her. "She smells nothing but antiseptic and fear. She needs an anchor." He walked to the bedside. Up close, she was even more striking. Her skin was translucent, blue veins mapping her arms like rivers. Her eyelashes were white. She looked like a porcelain doll that someone had smashed and tried to glue back together. Dominic pulled a chair up. He took her icy, limp hand in his massive, warm one. He pushed his alpha pheromones out, a scent of cedar, rain, and safety. It was a silent command to her wolf. Submit. Rest. Safe. He sat there for 6 hours. He didn't move when the sun came up. He didn't move when Reynolds brought him coffee. He waited. Around 10:15 a.m., her fingers twitched. Dominic leaned in. Easy! Her eyes snapped open. The violet irises were wide, dilated with panic. She gasped, trying to sit up, but the IV lines held her down. "The pups!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Don't hurt them! Please, Silas, don't—" "Shh," Dominic said, putting a firm hand on her shoulder to keep her from ripping her stitches. "Silas isn't here. You aren't in the snow anymore." She froze at the sound of his voice. She blinked, her vision clearing. She looked at Dominic, at the sheer size of him, the power radiating off him. She shrank back into the pillows, trembling. Who are you?" "I'm Dominic Blackwood," he said steadily. "I found you. You're in my hospital." "Blackwood?" Her breath hitched. "The Alpha King?" "Yes." She looked terrified. You have to let me go. If he finds out I'm here, if he knows the pups are alive—" "Who?" Dominic squeezed her hand, careful not to crush it. "Who did this to you?" She looked away, tears pooling in her violet eyes. "My mate, Alpha Silas Mercer." Dominic stiffened. Silas Mercer, the Alpha of the ironclad pack 300 miles east. A wealthy, politically connected pack known for its brutality and its strict adherence to genetic purity. "Silas is your mate?" Dominic asked, confusion coloring his tone. Why would a mate try to kill his own offspring? She looked at him, and the brokenness in her expression shattered Dominic's heart. "He said they weren't his," she whispered. "He said I was a genetic freak, a defect, and that I had polluted his line with monsters." Dominic signaled for Dr. Hayes to leave the room. This conversation needed to be private. The air in the room was heavy. "What is your name?" Dominic asked softly. "Serafina," she said. "Most call me Sarah." "Sarah, tell me exactly what happened." Sarah pulled the hospital sheet up to her chin. She looked small, but there was a steeliness in her jaw that told Dominic she was a survivor. "I was the Omega of the ironclad pack. My father was a Beta, my mother an Omega. I was born like this." She gestured to her pale skin. "The pack tolerated me because I was a good healer. I kept my head down. When Silas became Alpha, he chose me." "He claimed you." "Yes, but not out of love," Sarah said bitterly. "He was obsessed with the idea that my unique condition meant I carried rare genes. He wanted a unique heir. Something to show off. A trophy." Dominic felt a growl building in his chest. "Go on." "I got pregnant. It was a difficult pregnancy. When I gave birth, there were 6 of them. Usually, wolves have 2 and maybe 3. 6 is unheard of. And they were small. Runts." She took a shaky breath. Silas was furious. He wanted a strong alpha heir. Instead, he got 6 small, crying puppies. He called in his pack doctor. They did a blood test. Sarah's hands shook violently. Dominic covered them with his own again to steady her. The doctor came back an hour later. He told Silas the DNA didn't match. He said, "I must have slept with a rogue. A stray dog." "Did you?" Dominic asked. He needed to know the truth, though his instinct told him she was honest. "No." She looked him dead in the eye, violet clashing with his dark brown. I have never been with anyone but him. I swear it on my wolf. I was loyal. But Silas, his ego is fragile. He didn't question the doctor. He dragged me out of the birthing bed by my hair. He threw the pups in a sack. Dominic closed his eyes, visualizing the horror. He drove us to the border. He said he wouldn't kill me directly because it was bad luck to kill a white wolf, an old superstition. So he let the cold do it. He said, "If nature wants these bastards, nature can have them." "He left you to freeze," Dominic finished. "He stood there and watched me crawl into the snow," she wept. He laughed. Dominic stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. He paced the small room, his energy crackling like electricity. Silas Mercer. He had met the man at council meetings, arrogant, vain, wearing three-piece suits and drinking expensive scotch while talking about traditional values. "The pups," Dominic said. "Are they all healthy?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "I tried to keep them warm. Are they?" "They are alive," Dominic assured her quickly. "They are eating. They are warm. My medical team is with them right now." Sarah slumped in relief. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." "The DNA test," Dominic said, stopping his pacing. "Why would the doctor lie, unless Silas told him to?" Sarah shook her head. "The doctor, Dr. Aris, he's terrified of Silas. But..." Silas looked genuinely surprised and angry. If Silas wanted to get rid of me, he could have just rejected me. He didn't have to stage a fake paternity test. "So someone else tampered with the results," Dominic mused. "Or the test was wrong. Or..." Sarah hesitated. "There is a rumor about Silas." "What rumor?" "That he can't. That he's sterile. That his father knew it. And that's why Silas was so desperate for an heir immediately after taking the Alpha title, to prove he wasn't broken." Dominic's eyes narrowed. If Silas was sterile, then who was the father? "Sarah," Dominic asked carefully, "if Silas is sterile, is there any possibility, any gap in your memory?" "No," she insisted. "I was a virgin when he took me. I was locked in the estate. There was no one else." Dominic looked at her. He believed her. Her scent was pure. There was no deception in it, which meant there was a piece of this puzzle missing, a biological impossibility. Unless... Dominic went to the door and opened it. "Reynolds!" The beta appeared instantly. "Get a paternity test on those pups," Dominic ordered. "Run it against Silas Mercer's profile in the database, and run it against every male relative Silas has." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Every relative?" "Yes. And get security on this floor. Level 5 lockdown. If anyone from Ironclad calls, we deny she is here. As far as the world knows, Serafina Winter died in that snowstorm." He turned back to Sarah. She was watching him with wide, awe-struck eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "I'm a reject, an exile. Bringing me here is an act of war against Silas." Dominic walked back to the bed. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. He brushed a stray lock of white hair from her forehead. "Because, Serafina," he said, his voice dropping to a low rumble that made her shiver, "I don't like bullies, and I have a feeling that those 6 pups aren't bastards. I think they are the key to bringing Silas Mercer to his knees." He straightened up. "Rest now. You're under the protection of the Blackwood Pack, and I protect what is mine." Sarah watched him leave. For the first time in years, the cold that had lived in her bones began to thaw. "Mine," he had said. She wasn't sure if he meant she was his prisoner or his guest, but as she drifted into sleep, she realized she felt safer with this terrifying Alpha King than she ever had in the arms of her mate. 3 days passed. Serafina was healing with a speed that surprised even Dr. Hayes. The alpha blood Dominic had donated during her transfusion seemed to have supercharged her recovery. But while her body mended, her spirit remained tethered to the pediatric ward down the hall. On the fourth night, unable to sleep, Sarah slipped out of her room. She wore a heavy woolen robe Dominic had left for her. The hospital wing was dim, illuminated only by the soft blue glow of the monitors. She crept toward the incubator room. Through the glass, she saw a sight that stopped her breath in her throat. Dominic was there. The terrifying Alpha King, known for crushing rebellions and ruling with an iron fist, was sitting in a rocking chair. The room was warm, humidified for the pup's lungs. In his massive arms, he held the smallest puppy, the runt of the litter, a tiny thing with grey fur and white paws. Dominic was holding a small bottle of formula. The puppy was struggling to latch, making pitiful squeaking sounds. "Come on, little fighter," Dominic murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the glass. "You survived the ice. You don't get to quit on the milk. Drink." He adjusted his grip, using a devastating amount of care for hands that could break stone. He rubbed the puppy's throat with his thumb, coaxing the swallow reflex. The puppy finally latched, gulping greedily. Dominic let out a sigh, his shoulders relaxing. He looked down at the pup with an expression of profound sadness and longing. Sarah opened the door quietly. "He likes you." Dominic's head snapped up. For a second, the alpha mask slammed back into place, cold, distant, but it faltered when he saw it was her. "You should be resting, Serafina." "I couldn't sleep without seeing them." She walked closer, her bare feet silent on the tile. "That one. I was afraid he wouldn't make it. He was the coldest when you found us." "He's stubborn," Dominic said, looking back down at the pup. "He has your eyes, even as a wolf." Sarah froze. She reached out and touched the puppy's head. The pup leaned into her touch, sensing his mother. "Do they have names?" Dominic asked. "No," Sarah whispered. "I was afraid to name them. In the ironclad pack, you don't name runts until they survive the first month." "Silas. Silas said it was a waste of a name." "Silas is a fool," Dominic growled softly. "This one is Ash, because he rose from the ashes of the snow." "Ash," Sarah tested the name. It felt right, strong. "And the others? That's up to you. You're their mother." "You saved them," she said, looking at Dominic's profile. The harsh lines of his face were softened by the dim light. "You are more of a father to them in 3 days than Silas was in the 9 months I carried them." Dominic went still. He placed the now sleeping Ash back into the incubator with his siblings. He turned to Sarah, towering over her. The space between them crackled with an unspoken energy. It was the pull of the moon goddess, faint but undeniable. "I didn't have a father growing up," Dominic confessed, a rare admission. "My father died in a challenge when I was 2. I was raised by the pack. I learned that blood doesn't make a father. Protection does. Sacrifice does." He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of white hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her cheek, and heat flared through her skin like a brand. "You are safe here, Sarah. I promise you. I won't let anyone touch you or these pups again." Sarah looked up into his dark eyes. For the first time, she didn't see a king. She saw a man who was just as lonely as she was. "Why?" she asked breathlessly. "Why do you care so much?" Dominic's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Because when I dug you out of that snow, I felt something break inside me. And I think you're the only one who can fix it." Before the moment could deepen, the door burst open. It was Reynolds. He looked winded, clutching a manila folder. He stopped, realizing he was interrupting something, but his expression was too grave to apologize. "Alpha," Reynolds said. "We have the DNA results." Dominic stepped back, the mask returning instantly. And, Reynolds looked at Sarah, then back to Dominic. "You're not going to believe this. Silas Mercer isn't sterile, but he isn't the father either." Dominic's office was a fortress of mahogany and leather. He sat behind his desk, the DNA report spread out before him. Sarah sat in the guest chair, her hands gripping her knees. "Explain," Dominic ordered. "If Silas isn't the father, and Sarah was faithful, how do these pups exist?" Dr. Hayes stepped forward. He looked nervous. "Biologically, it's a phenomenon called superfecundation. But that's not what happened here. The DNA markers are clear. These pups share 50% of their DNA with Serafina. The other 50%, it matches a profile in the National Shifter database. But it's a restricted file." "Whose?" Dominic demanded. "Victor Mercer," Reynolds answered. Sarah gasped. "Victor? Silas's younger brother?" "The same," Reynolds nodded. "He's the beta of the ironclad pack." "That's impossible," Sarah shook her head violently. "I barely spoke to Victor. He was always kind to me, but from a distance. We never... "We know," Dr. Hayes interrupted gently, "because we found something else in your blood work, Serafina. Traces of a synthetic compound called lethiservin." Dominic slammed his fist on the desk. "Memory suppressants." "Yes," Hayes confirmed. "It's a black market drug. It induces short-term amnesia and compliance. Someone drugged you, Serafina. Likely artificially inseminated you or forced themselves on you while you were under the influence." Sarah put a hand over her mouth, nausea rolling through her. The violation was absolute. She had been used as a vessel, a pawn in a game she didn't understand. "Victor," Dominic said, his voice ice-cold. "Why would the beta want to impregnate the alpha's mate?" "Because of the succession laws," Reynolds explained, pacing the room. "The ironclad pack operates on first blood. If the alpha dies without an heir, the beta takes over. But if the alpha has an heir, the beta remains a servant forever. However, if the alpha produces an heir that is proven to be illegitimate, then the alpha is disgraced," Dominic finished the thought, "and stripped of his rank." "Exactly," Reynolds said. "Victor orchestrated this. He drugged Sarah. He ensured the pups were his. Then he likely paid Dr. Aris to tell Silas the pups were mongrels or rogue-born without revealing the true father. He wanted Silas to kill the pups in a rage. Once Silas murdered his own mate and rogue spawn, Victor would reveal the DNA test proving the pups were actually Mercer blood, his own, frame Silas for murdering the pack's future, and take the throne." "It's a coup," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He used me to destroy his brother. He made Silas think I was a cheater so Silas would kill me." "It's brilliant," Dominic admitted darkly, "and evil. Silas is a monster for what he did, but he was a weapon aimed by his own brother." Dominic stood up and walked around the desk. He knelt before Sarah, taking her trembling hands. "This is not your fault. Do you hear me? You were a victim of a war between two greedy men." "They're monsters," she sobbed. "Both of them. Silas for believing it, Victor for doing it. I can never go back there." "You won't," Dominic vowed. "But we are going to send a message." He stood up and turned to Reynolds. "The Winter Solstice Summit is in 2 days." Reynolds's eyes widened. "Dominic, that's in neutral territory. All the alphas will be there, including Silas." "I know." Dominic smiled, but it was a smile that promised violence. "Prepare the jet, and get a stylist for Serafina. She's not going as a refugee. She's going as my guest of honor." "Dominic," Sarah stood up, panic rising. "I can't face him. He thinks I'm dead. If he sees me, if he sees you alive, hanging on the arm of the Alpha King, looking like a queen—" Dominic stepped close, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous whisper. "It will break him. He will panic. And when he panics, he will make a mistake. And Victor will be there too. We will watch them tear each other apart." I don't have a dress," she stammered, caught in his magnetic pull. "I'll buy you 1,000 dresses," Dominic said. "But for this, wear red, the color of war." The grand hall of the neutral territory was a cathedral of glass and steel, suspended over a cliff edge in Colorado. Inside, the air smelled of champagne, expensive perfume, and the potent, aggressive pheromones of 50 alpha wolves. Silas Mercer stood near the bar, nursing a scotch. He looked tired. Since the death of his mate and the disposal of the rogue Pups, he had been plagued by nightmares. Not of guilt. He told himself he did what was right for the bloodline, but of a strange emptiness in the pack link. Next to him stood his brother, Victor. Victor looked smug, checking his watch. "You should drink less, brother," Victor chided. "The council is watching. You look like a man haunted." "Shut up, Victor," Silas snapped. "I did what I had to do. The bitch betrayed me." "Of course she did," Victor soothed, hiding a smirk behind his glass. "You saved the pack from pollution." Suddenly, the chatter in the room died. The string quartet stopped playing. The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. "Announcing!" The herald boomed, his voice trembling slightly. "Dominic Blackwood, the Alpha King of the Obsidian Alliance." Dominic stepped out. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like armor. He radiated power so intense that lesser wolves in the room instinctively lowered their heads. But no one was looking at Dominic. They were looking at the woman on his arm. She was a vision of ice and fire. Her hair, white as snow, was styled in cascading waves down her back. Her skin glowed under the chandeliers. She wore a gown of deep, blood-red velvet that hugged every curve, with a slit that went up to her thigh. Diamond drops hung from her ears. She looked regal, untouchable. "Is that?" someone whispered. "It can't be. The albino?" Silas dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing in the silence. He stared. It was Serafina. But it wasn't the cowering, broken woman he had dragged through the snow. She held her head high, her violet eyes scanning the room with a cold confidence Dominic had instilled in her. Dominic placed a possessive hand on the small of her back and guided her down the stairs. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. They walked straight toward Silas. Silas couldn't breathe. "Sarah!" he choked out. You're dead." Dominic stopped 3 feet from Silas. He loomed over the other alpha, his height advantage significant. "Hello, Silas," Dominic said pleasantly. "I believe you lost something." "She's my mate," Silas snarled, the shock turning instantly to possessive rage. "Get your hands off her, Blackwood." "Your mate?" Dominic raised an eyebrow. "Funny. I found her freezing to death in a ditch on my land. Abandoned. According to wolf law, a rejected mate is a free agent. You threw her away like garbage. I picked her up. She is under my protection now." "She is a cheater and a whore," Silas shouted, drawing gasps from the crowd. "She carried a rogue's bastards." Sarah stepped forward. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she felt the heat of Dominic behind her, a solid wall of support. She remembered the 6 pups waiting for her back at the estate. Ash, the little fighters. "They weren't bastards, Silas," she said, her voice clear and ringing through the hall. "And they weren't yours." I knew it. Silas pointed a shaking finger at her. They are your brothers. Sarah dropped the bomb. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Silas froze. He slowly turned his head to look at Victor. Victor's smug face had drained of all color. He looked like a cornered rat. She's lying. She's crazy. The cold addled her brain. We have the DNA tests, Victor, Dominic said, pulling a folded paper from his tuxedo pocket, and the toxicology report showing the memory suppressants you used on her. You raped your alpha's mate to stage a coup. Dominic tossed the papers at Silas's feet. Read it, Silas. Your brother played you for a fool. You killed your own nephews to hand him your crown. Silas stared at the papers. He didn't need to read them. He saw the guilt on Victor's face. The betrayal hit him harder than any physical blow. The brother he had trusted. The mate he had tortured. A roar of pure, unadulterated fury ripped from Silas's throat. His eyes shifted from human to wolf yellow in a split second. Victor! Silas lunged at his brother. Victor shifted mid-air, a brown wolf meeting Silas's grey one. They collided in a ball of fur and teeth, crashing into the buffet table. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Screams, shattering glass, and wolves shifting. Dominic calmly wrapped his arm around Sarah's waist, shielding her from the debris. "Shall we?" he asked, as if he were asking her to dance. "You started a riot," she said, looking at the two brothers tearing each other apart on the floor. "No." Dominic smiled, leading her toward the exit as security swarmed in. "I just finished a war. Let's go home to the pups." But as they turned to leave, a voice boomed from the balcony above, a voice ancient and terrible. "Stop!" The fighting ceased instantly. Even Silas and Victor, locked in a death grip, froze. Looking up, an elderly man in wheelchair was being pushed to the railing. It was the Grand Elder, the keeper of the old laws. "Dominic Blackwood," the elder rasped. "You claim the Albino Omega and her pups are under your protection." "I do," Dominic challenged. "Then you have unknowingly invoked the prophecy of the White Winter," the elder announced. "Bring the pups to the council. If they possess the blood of the ancients, then that woman is not just an Omega. She is the key to the throne of High King, and she belongs to no single pack. She belongs to us all." Dominic's grip on Sarah tightened. The political coup was over, but a much more dangerous game had just begun. The flight back to the West Coast was shrouded in a heavy, suffocating silence. Outside the Gulf Stream jet, the weather had turned violently hostile. A supercell storm was tracking them, mirroring the turmoil that had erupted in the council chambers. Serafina sat in the cream-colored leather seat, her knees pulled tight to her chest. She had scrubbed the makeup from the gala off her face, leaving her skin raw and pale. She looked less like the queen who had descended the staircase, and more like the frightened girl Dominic had dug out of the ice. "The prophecy of the White Winter," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. She stared out the porthole at the jagged lightning illuminating the clouds. "They aren't going to let us live, are they? The council, the elders. To them, I'm not a person. I'm a biological weapon." Dominic stood by the bar, pouring a tumbler of amber whiskey. His hand was steady, rock steady, though the rage radiating off him was enough to heat the cabin. He abandoned the drink and walked to her, dropping to one knee so he was eye level with her violet eyes. "They are afraid, Serafina," Dominic said, his voice low and vibrating with intensity. "For 500 years the council has maintained power by keeping the bloodlines separate. Alphas marry alphas, betas marry betas. They preach purity, but they practice control. The prophecy speaks of a union that breaks those chains, a white wolf and a shadow alpha. And the pups?" Her voice trembled, cracking on the word. The elder said they belong to everyone. He called them the key to the throne. They belong to you, Dominic corrected her, a growl lacing his words. He took her cold hands in his large, warm ones. And you are with me. I have 3,000 soldiers guarding the perimeter of the Blackwood estate. I have anti-air batteries and wolves who have trained their entire lives for a siege. Let the council come. Let them try to take what is mine. He brought her knuckles to his lips. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her, stronger than before. It wasn't just comfort. It was the biological imperative of the mate bond, finally settling into place. It was a tether, binding her soul to his. I'm scared, Dominic, she confessed, tears pricking her eyes. Not for me. I've been disposable my whole life. But for Ash, for the little ones. They are so small. Fear is a tool, Dominic said, his eyes burning with a golden, predatory light. It sharpens the senses. But do not let it consume you. You are the mother of the future High Kings. Tonight, we do not hide. Tonight, we end the Mercer line forever. They landed on the private strip just as the blizzard made landfall. The wind was screaming, a physical wall of white noise that whipped the trees into a frenzy. By the time the convoy of armored SUVs reached the main gates of the Blackwood estate, the enemy was already there. It wasn't a messy mob. It was a precise, military formation. Standing on the frozen lawn, illuminated by the floodlights of the manor, were 50 wolves. They wore the silver-grey tactical cloaks of the Judiciary Enforcers, the Council's personal death squad. These were wolves bred for one purpose, to execute alphas who disobeyed the old laws, and leading them, standing arrogantly at the base of the stone steps, was Silas Mercer. Silas looked deranged. His tuxedo from the gala was shredded, his shoulder heavily bandaged from the fight with his brother Victor. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around with the manic energy of a man who had lost everything and had one final chance to buy it back. The council had clearly cut a deal with him. Retrieve the abominations and regain your status. Dominic stepped out of the lead SUV. He didn't run. He walked with a terrifying slowness, buttoning his suit jacket as if he were attending a board meeting, not a massacre. Reynolds and his top lieutenants flanked him, assault rifles in hand, but Dominic carried no weapon. "Dominic Blackwood!" Silas screamed over the wind. "By order of the Grand Council and the High Elder, you are harboring fugitives of the state. Hand over the genetic anomalies immediately." Dominic stopped 10 yards away. The snow swirled around his legs. "You look like a dog on a leash, Silas. Did they promise you a biscuit if you fetched the pups?" "I am the arm of the law," Silas spat, veins bulging in his neck. "Give me the bitch and the bastards. If you comply, the council will allow you to keep your lands and your life. Refuse, and the Blackwood line ends tonight." "You speak of law." Dominic's voice remained calm, but he projected it using the Alpha command, a sonic boom of authority that rattled the windows of the manor. "But there is only one law on my territory. Leave or die." The silver-cloaked enforcers flinched. They were elite killers, but facing the Alpha King of the Obsidian Alliance on his home soil was a suicide mission, and they knew it. Silas saw their hesitation. He knew if he lost momentum now, he was dead. Fueled by madness and the desperate need for redemption, he tore at his clothes. "Kill him!" Silas shrieked. "Kill them all! Take the woman!" Silas's body contorted, bones cracking audibly as he shifted. He exploded into his wolf form, a massive, scarred, grey beast. He threw his head back and howled, a sound of pure malice. The enforcers had no choice. They shifted. 50 wolves, a mix of browns, greys, and blacks, charged the steps. "Defend the Queen!" Dominic roared. The battle was instant and visceral. The Blackwood pack poured out from the sides of the house, colliding with the enforcers in a wave of fur and violence. The pristine white snow was painted red within seconds. Dominic didn't shift immediately. He grabbed the first enforcer that lunged at him, a massive timber wolf, by the throat. With a display of raw, human strength, he slammed the beast into the pavement, crushing its windpipe. Then, the darkness took him. Dominic shifted. He became the Midnight Wolf. He was significantly larger than the others, a creature of shadow and muscle. He moved through the battlefield like a scythe. He didn't just fight. He dismantled. He snapped legs, tore through flanks, and threw fully grown wolves aside as if they were toys. His eyes were locked on one target. Silas. The two alphas met in the center of the driveway, near the frozen fountain. Silas was fast, fueled by adrenaline, snapping his jaws at Dominic's throat. But Dominic was fighting for something Silas couldn't understand. Silas was fighting for a title. Dominic was fighting for a family. Dominic took a bite to the shoulder, ignoring the pain, and used the leverage to clamp his massive jaws onto the back of Silas's neck. He shook the grey wolf violently, slamming him into the stone fountain. Silas yelped, the sound high and pathetic, clawing frantically at the stone. Suddenly, a sound pierced the chaos of the battle. It wasn't a growl or a howl, it was a scream. A human scream. Dominic froze, his ears swiveling toward the manor. The sound came from the third floor, the nursery. While the carnage unfolded on the lawn, a shadow had slipped past the perimeter. One of the enforcers, a lean and treacherous tracker, had bypassed the front line. He had scaled the ivy trellis on the east wing and shattered the window of the ventilation shaft. Inside the nursery, the air was warm and smelled of milk and baby powder. The 6 pups were huddled together in the incubator, sleeping through the distant noise. Serafina stood in front of the incubator. She held a silver scalpel she had stolen from the medical wing, a tiny, laughable weapon against a werewolf, but she gripped it until her knuckles turned white. The heavy oak door to the nursery shuddered. Boom! Sarah backed up, putting her body between the door and her children. "You will not touch them," she whispered to herself. "You will not." Boom! The wood splintered. The door was torn off its hinges. A large, russet-colored wolf squeezed through the frame. It was the tracker. He shook the glass from his fur and looked at Sarah. His lips curled back to reveal yellow, drooling fangs. He didn't look at her like an enemy. He looked at her like meat. He took a step forward, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Get back!" Sarah screamed, slashing the air with the scalpel. The wolf barked a laugh, a guttural, mocking sound. He crouched, his hind legs bunching up, preparing to spring. He launched himself through the air, jaws wide open, aiming for her throat. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the teeth, screaming her denial. But the impact never came. Instead, the temperature in the room plummeted. It wasn't just a draft. It was a vacuum of thermal energy. The air turned instantly into absolute zero. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot. Sarah opened her eyes. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The russet wolf was suspended in mid-air. He was frozen. Literally. His front paws were encased in thick, jagged spikes of blue ice that had erupted from the floorboards. His torso was trapped in a pillar of frost. He was whimpering, his eyes wide with terror, unable to move a muscle. Sarah turned around slowly. The incubator lid was open. Ash, the tiny runt of the litter, had crawled out. The puppy was sitting on the plush carpet, his head cocked to the side. But he didn't look like a puppy anymore. His fur was standing on end. His eyes were glowing with a blinding, white luminescence that lit up the dark room. A swirl of snow was rotating around his small body, a miniature blizzard contained within the nursery. The prophecy wasn't just a metaphor about leadership. It was literal. The union of the albino and the Mercer line had unlocked the genetic code of the ancients, the elemental wolves. Ash looked at the frozen wolf. The puppy let out a sharp, high-pitched yip. The ice expanded. It crept up the intruder's snout, sealing his mouth shut. Then over his eyes. The wolf fell silent, encased in a living tomb of ice, rendered unconscious by the sheer cold. The door to the nursery flew open again. Dominic burst in. He had shifted back to human form to navigate the stairs, his body naked, heaving, and covered in the blood of his enemies. He saw the frozen statue of the wolf. He saw Sarah, unharmed, trembling against the crib, and he saw the tiny puppy sitting amidst a swirl of magical snow. Dominic stared, his breath catching in his throat. "The white winter," he whispered, awe replacing the adrenaline. "It's him. It's Ash." Sarah dropped the scalpel and scooped the puppy up. The moment her skin touched him, the glow faded. The snow vanished. Ash yawned, nuzzled into the crook of her neck, and fell back asleep as if he hadn't just summoned a glacier. "They aren't just wolves, Dominic," Sarah said, looking at her mate with wide, terrified, wondrous eyes. "They are something else." Dominic walked back out to the battlefield. He had thrown on a tattered robe he grabbed from the hallway. In one arm he carried Ash. With his other hand he held Sarah's, pulling her along with him. The fighting outside had stopped. The silence was heavier than the storm. The remaining enforcers, about 20 left standing, were looking up at the house. They could feel it, the shift in atmospheric pressure, the scent of ozone and ancient magic that was rolling off the tiny bundle in Dominic's arm. Silas was limping near the fountain. He had shifted back to human form, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked up, his face a mask of confusion and horror. "You," Silas wheezed, spitting blood. "You brought the witch out." Dominic stopped at the top of the stairs. He held up the sleeping puppy. "Look, Silas," Dominic commanded, his voice booming across the frozen yard. "Look at what you threw in the trash." Ash stirred. Sensing the hostility of the man below, the puppy didn't wake up, but he reacted. A ripple of frost shot out from the porch, racing down the stone steps, turning the blood-soaked driveway into a sheet of ice. Silas slipped, falling to his knees. The cold bit into his skin, unnatural and burning. "No." Silas wept, staring at the child. The realization washed over him with the force of a tsunami. He hadn't just rejected a weak offspring. He had rejected a god. He had thrown away the most powerful weapon the wolf world had seen in a millennium. I could have been the father of kings." "You were unworthy," Dominic said coldly. "You saw weakness where there was power. You saw a defect where there was divinity." Dominic walked down the icy steps, his boots crunching on the frost. He stopped in front of the kneeling Silas. "Victor is in a cell, awaiting execution for treason. And you, mercy," Silas begged, grabbing the hem of Dominic's robe. "I am your blood brother in the eyes of the council. We are alphas. You cannot kill a surrendered alpha without a trial. You surrendered your rank the moment you left 6 innocent lives to freeze in a storm," Dominic said. "I am not killing you as an alpha. I am executing you as a pest." Dominic didn't shift. He didn't make a spectacle of it. He simply drew the silver dagger from his boot, the blade of the Blackwood ancestors that had not tasted blood in 50 years. "For Seraphina," Dominic whispered. He drove the blade into Silas's heart. Silas gasped, his eyes widening one last time before glazing over. He slumped forward into the red snow, dead. The remaining enforcers watched their leader fall. Then they looked at the puppy in Dominic's arms. Slowly, one by one, they dropped to their knees. They didn't bow out of respect for Dominic. They bowed to the child. They bared their necks in absolute submission to the blood of the ancients. Dominic looked at Sarah. Her white hair was blowing wildly in the wind, her violet eyes fierce and unyielding. She wasn't a victim anymore. She stood over the body of her abuser, holding the hand of her savior. She was the mother of the storm. Reynolds climbed onto the porch railing, raising his bloody fist in the air. "Hail!" Reynolds shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "Hail the High King! Hail the Luna! Hail!" The roar went up from the Blackwood pack. "Hail!" The defeated enforcers joined in, their voices joining the chorus of victory. Dominic pulled Sarah close, wrapping his arm around her waist. He looked out at the bowing wolves, at the dead past, and the terrifying, magnificent future. "It is done," he whispered into her hair. "The winter is ours." Silas Mercer died, realizing he had thrown away a dynasty. But Dominic Blackwood, he built an empire on the very thing others rejected. They say the Blackwood pack is now the strongest in history, guarded by 6 children who command the elements themselves. But the strongest magic of all wasn't the ice or the claws. It was the Alpha who looked at a frozen grave and saw a future. What would you have done if you were Dominic? Would you have taken on the entire council for a stranger? And seriously, how cute is Ash with his little ice powers? If you loved this story, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next saga. We have a story coming up about a billionaire dragon shifter you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.